Hey everyone, welcome to the Unnecessary Nonsense Podcast YouTube channel. Antonio Brown has been dealt to the Oakland Raiders, and I thought I'd take a couple of minutes just to quickly go over the particulars for you, and then also talk about a little bit of my thoughts. As is always the way, we actually recorded a podcast earlier on Saturday, and then of course by the end of the day on Saturday, everything changes and a completely new narrative has come out of it. So the Antonio Brown saga is not over. I don't really think it ever really ends with Antonio Brown, but at least this current chapter has come to a close. And now let's talk about what happened and then kind of some of my thoughts on what happens going forward. So I'm going to take this off of the ESPN website and I'm going to link to this article in the description in case you want to read it yourself. I'm not going to read you the whole thing. Specifically, the Pittsburgh Steelers traded their wide receiver to the Oakland Raiders in exchange for a 3rd and 5th round draft pick, according to Adam Schefter. Also, a big part of the deal really came down to Antonio Brown wanting to restructure his deal with whatever team he went to. That's likely part of the reason that the Buffalo Bills transaction that was reported on Friday didn't come to pass. So specifically, Antonio Brown will receive a new 3-year deal worth up to $54.125 million with the Raiders, with $30.125 million guaranteed. So that's a big piece because he went from having no more guaranteed money left to having over $30 million guaranteed left in the remaining of his contract. He goes from $17 million per season on average to being $19.8. So that would make him, I believe, the highest paid wide receiver in football, which is huge. Now, obviously, for almost all parties involved, Derek Carr, Antonio Brown, John Gruden, and of course, Drew Rosenhaus, Antonio Brown's agent, everybody is saying all the right things. You know, this is great. This is great for the organization, everything. And what happens going forward? So this is kind of the opinion part of it here. Who won this trade really depends on what you believe. If you believe that it comes strictly to talent, well, obviously the Oakland Raiders got a very, very talented wide receiver, probably one of the best, if not the best in the game, for really a 3rd round and a 5th round draft pick. So, Pittsburgh got fleeced. The reality is, though, that Antonio Brown was pretty much toxic at this point as far as Pittsburgh was concerned. If they wanted to regain any kind of control, the relationship with him and Ben Roethlisberger wasn't working anymore. And going forward in the locker room, having that kind of a presence around wouldn't have been that great. And in addition to that, if Mike Tomlin wanted to restore any kind of order to that locker room, having another one of those personalities wouldn't have been the best thing for them. So if you believe that the chemistry thing was the most important, then Pittsburgh did what they needed to do. And looking at it from the Oakland perspective, it's going to really depend on how long they're able to keep Antonio Brown happy. Right now, they're in the honeymoon phase. It just started. So, of course, everyone in Oakland is thrilled. From their standpoint, if you really want to, it wasn't one transaction, but if you really want to think about this from the standpoint of what has happened basically in the last calendar year with John Gruden and the Raiders, they basically took Amari Cooper and traded Amari Cooper and a 3rd round and a 5th round draft pick, indirectly, of course, it's 2 transactions, indirectly for Antonio Brown and a 1st rounder. Now, like I said, it wasn't one transaction. It was a deal with the Cowboys that happened last season, and then obviously this transaction now. But looking at it from that standpoint, it is interesting that they effectively upgraded at wide receiver and were able to get a 1st round draft pick from the Cowboys. Again, how successful you think Oakland is going to be with this going forward is going to come down 100% to how successfully they're able to keep Antonio Brown happy now. So Antonio Brown now, from his standpoint, he's thrilled at the moment because he's got all the money that he wanted to get. He's got the guaranteed money he was looking for. He's going to get a fresh start in Oakland where he's not going to have to deal with Ben Roethlisberger because if that relationship was really the problem from his standpoint and not the money, which I'm a little dubious about, but let's assume that the Ben Roethlisberger thing matters more than we think it does. What it really comes down to is, if that's true, then Antonio Brown theoretically should be happy. He's got all the money that he wanted. He's got likely going to have a better relationship with Derek Carr, who kind of needs him more than Ben Roethlisberger needed him. So for the Oakland fans, it's going to be interesting to see. Of course, also, they're going to be headed into Las Vegas. So from a star power standpoint, this is good for Oakland. And they didn't really give up much. The biggest thing they gave up is the flexibility because now they've committed this additional money to him. And then from Pittsburgh's standpoints, really all they did was they just had to take pennies on the dollar to get rid of kind of a toxic element in their locker room. If that has value, then from the Pittsburgh perspective, they're going to have to kind of live with this. And then also the dead money on the cap that they're going to have to incur, which I think is over $21 million. Short version, high level, I would say at the onset, Oakland won the deal, for if nothing else, because they got the player that they would want. They got the box office they're going to want, the star power they're going to want. And at the same time, they really didn't have to give up a lot other than money. From the Pittsburgh perspective, obviously they lose a huge playmaker, but at the same time, they don't have to deal with that headache anymore. It becomes Oakland's problem. The question that I'm going to have going forward that I'm proposing to you here is, now that Antonio Brown has the money, now that he was able to exercise power really over the Pittsburgh Steelers, is that the end of it? Is that everything now that he wanted going forward? What's going to happen if he and Derek Carr aren't able to get on the same page early on? And what if he discovers what, any other logical person would conclude? Derek Carr isn't really Ben Roethlisberger. Regardless of whether you like Ben Roethlisberger or not, you're basically hinging your entire wagon on Derek Carr being able to produce somewhat of a percentage of what Ben Roethlisberger was able to do. If they're able to get that chemistry, if they're able to connect, if he's able to get his numbers, if they're able to put together a great offense, then it's going to go well. But as soon as things start happening, if things don't go well, if he starts dropping passes, or if Derek Carr is not able to get it to him, teams start focusing in on Antonio Brown and his numbers start falling, at what point then, and also if they're not winning, at what point then does Antonio Brown start complaining about his new team? At what point does he start creating problems for them? And now, if you're Oakland, if that happens in the next season or two, you're going to have him under contract with this new deal where you gave him all this guaranteed money, and now you're going to be in an even worse place to try to get rid of him than Pittsburgh was, because he will be a little bit older, he'll be even more expensive, and more money is guaranteed for him. So he's virtually untradeable for the rest of this deal if he starts acting up and causing any problems in Oakland. From that standpoint, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I think this isn't the last chapter in the Antonio Brown melodrama, but for now, this will be the end of this chapter, and we'll see what happens going forward. So those are my thoughts on this specific one. So before you go, I'm going to put your attention to the channel that you're looking at. It's the Unnecessary Nonsense Podcast YouTube channel. It's basically a supplement to podcasts we have going on. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify, as well as any other podcast app that you happen to have. We'd love for you to check it out. We do other videos like this from time to time as different stories come up in football and in baseball. We talk about different sports on the podcast. It's really what catches our eye and what is interesting to us. So from that standpoint, we appreciate you checking out the video. If you could leave some kind of a comment, we'd love to hear any feedback that you have, positive or negative, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks very much.